Hi, it's Nicole. As part of my English degree, I've been reading some French stuff. So for those of you who have been following my journey, my going back to uni journey, this is for the narrative transformation module seminar number 2. But for the rest of you who don't know what this is all about, what's the backstory, don't worry, it just need to know I'm telling you about medieval chivalric romance today, and the books and the authors I'm going to mention today are Marie de France, the Lais of Marie de France, and Chretien de Troyes, the short stories by Chretien de Troyes. So those are the two authors, and I've been reading some of their stories, some of their lais recently. So before I tell you more about the books themselves, here are some of my first impressions straight after the seminar. Just came out of the second narrative transformations seminar, so here's the immediate reaction, first impression. First of all, we got moved from a stable to the professor's office, which was much better, much cozier and more furnished, but we still haven't got desks. So I think that's going to be the case for the rest of the year. We're not going to have desks, but that's okay. Everybody's getting better at balancing their laptops and iPads on their laps. So today we were discussing Medieval Chivalric Romance by two authors, Marie de France and Chretien de Troyes. So I am not familiar with them until about 2 weeks ago. I've never read them, I never heard them, so they are less familiar than the Odyssey and the Aeneid, in the sense that at least we all heard of the Odyssey and the Aeneid, even maybe we haven't read it before. But yeah, Marie de France and Chretien de Troyes, I have no idea who they were. So I was pleasantly surprised how much I liked them. You know, last time I said I'm open to changing my mind what my essays are going to be on. I'm open to changing my topics to Marie de France, or more likely Chretien de Troyes, because I like his writing better. So who are they? They both French. So Marie de France, well, actually we know very little about either of them, so this is all scholarly educated guess. Marie de France is French, but she lives in England and she writes for the court. Her stories, her short stories, are called the lais of Marie de France, and she kind of writes them for the court entertainment. Chretien de Troyes is French and he lives in France, and he also writes for the court by the sounds of it, and he has what they called, I want to say sponsors, patrons from the court. So they are basically the beginning of chivalric romance genre, although interestingly the professor was saying romance at the beginning was not a genre, it was a language. Compared to Latin is the vernacular, is that the right word? As in common language of those geographical areas. So Latin was used to write scholarly stuff, church stuff, important stuff. Romance was used to write entertainment literature. By the 14th century, I think she said, it slowly became a genre. So about these two authors themselves and their stories, the lais of Marie de France are much shorter. All of them are about ladies and their knights, adventures, quests, love, if you don't love me I'm going to die kind of stories. But I said I prefer Chretien de Troyes' stories because his characters are more 3D, more relatable, their love stories are more believable, just generally they feel more like our stories now. I think maybe that's why I like them better. And Marie's stories are a lot more like classical epics, like the Odyssey and the Aeneid. They do things, and the motivation or the reasons behind them are not always given. So sometimes it feels a bit like, what? And there's some very interesting topics we kind of mentioned. Our group is about 12 people, I think, so everybody kind of got to say a little bit. Their first impression will stand out most to them, so it was quite interesting to hear everybody's opinions and kind of first reaction. A lot of us mentioned how kind of shocking or maybe over dramatic love can do to people, and kind of love is above everything. The power of love conquers everything, for good and for ill. And a lot of the stories are about adulterous relationships, in the sense that the lady has a husband and a knight comes along and takes her away willingly, as in she willingly follows him, because the husbands are a lot of the time old and jealous and wealthy and lock their wives up in a tower, and that makes the affair, the love story, kind of more justifiable. But then we were discussing, these people are clearly Christians, they believe in Christian faith. For one example, the lady who is married to a husband who is locked up asks for any knight to come and rescue her, and a knight just appeared, and then she said, I will give my love to you if you prove that you are a Christian and you love God. So the way to do it is he takes communion, and then she said, fine, I will give you my love, and they go off to bedroom. That's really confusing and intriguing. So they clearly believe in Christian God, but what they're doing is clearly against Christian ethics, I'd say, right? But then on the other hand, the original husbands, are in this kind of situation usually portrayed as wicked and not worthy and really flat. So you don't know how they think, how they feel. They're just a cardboard cartoon character, which makes it really hard to sympathize with them. I know in theory it's completely wrong what this knight and this lady are doing, but at the same time, in terms of emotion and feeling, you feel like, yes, the couple should get together because they love each other. So that comes up a lot, which I find very interesting. And then I really want to know what's in Marie's head when she was writing them. Does she approve of it, this kind of outside marriage relationships? Does she approve of them? Or is she trying to say something else, like a lot of the women are in really unhappy marriage relationships, therefore it's almost like she wishes more worthy men exist and would take them away? I have no idea. So yeah, that's why I find it so fascinating. Some people in the group just flatly said, oh, this is awful, I hate this kind of stories, how can a woman do this, or how can a man do this, which I completely can't understand. But then I don't hate the stories, I just find them really interesting. That kind of shows the thinking behind the story, the thinking, I guess, in that culture context, what is going on. I don't think we have a straightforward answer, but just to put it out there. So if you're interested, you can read too. They are really worth reading. So those stories are usually the problem I was just talking about comes in Marie's lais. In Chrétien's stories, the characters are more developed and the plots are more logical and satisfying. Specifically, we read The Knight with the Lion, I think the one about Yvain, and Percival, which is also called The Story of the Grail, I think. Percival is such a funny character. It's like a young boy from the Welsh countryside decide, I'm going to become a knight. And then his mother said, if you are going to become a knight, you need to do this, you need to do that. And then he goes out into the world, says, I'm going to do this because my mother says so. And he keeps on doing that until he finds a better tutor who kind of educated him. I'd love to be able to spend more time in those stories and do more research, but I now have to move on to read for the next seminar, which is Chaucer's Troilus and Crusade, which I just learned about half an hour ago. That it was written in Middle English and it's about this big. I don't know how many pages, but it's big. So I shall proceed soon and not make the same mistake that I made the previous 2 weeks. I spent way too long in C.S. Lewis and not enough time in the primary text. So I was staying up last night till about 11 reading the stories by Chretien, which was not ideal. So let's see how I get on. So those are some of the thoughts and first impressions I had straight after the seminar, straight after the discussions. And since then I have read some secondary literature, mostly C.S. Lewis and his work on medieval literature, specifically on romance, called The Allegory of Love. I haven't read much, it's so dense. I can only read about 2 pages at a time before my brain just fries. But it's already very helpful. For example, some of the questions I had in that previous clip, C.S. Lewis already explained a little bit, things like why the romantic relationship between a knight and a lady is so highly praised. One of the reasons is that the marriage at the time is really not very commendable. The pattern of marriage is really not very Christian. For example, I imagined a lot of the marriages would have been arranged for the interest, the political interest, the interest of the families, whatever, that they would marry somebody for that purpose. But I hadn't thought that they would break the marriage. The men would just get rid of their ladies, get rid of their wives when that benefit, that political interest or whatever interests do not exist anymore, they could just get rid of their ladies. So that says a lot about why Marie de France would imagine different kinds of relationships, because I guess maybe her opinions on marriage is very, very low. Another thing is, there are a lot. C.S. Lewis said a lot about the view on marriage, on love and sex, just generally speaking, during the medieval period. It's all quite different to how we view things now. So it's really helpful to know those backgrounds, those contexts. But basically, it's almost like a rebellious reaction towards the church's teaching on marriage and love and sex. I mean, the lais, the medieval romance, the stories are a response to the teaching, to the view on marriage at the time. And that makes sense too. For example, the church says love or passion is wicked. Love itself is wicked, as in passion itself is wicked, within or without a marriage. So you cannot love your wife. If you love your wife too much, you are sinning. Therefore, the romances says love is great, passion is amazing. We only want to write about love and passion, and the story is full of it, and everybody is doing everything because of love and passion, and it's good and right. That's one way they reacted against the church's teaching. Something else C.S. Lewis said is also very interesting. Before this point, love stories, romantic love stories, romance, was not a subject for literature, not the main subject. So there was no works of fiction that had love, romantic relationship as their main subject. We have Dido, obviously, in the Aeneid. If you watched my previous video comparing Aeneas and Odysseus, you might have heard of Dido, the great love story between the queen Dido and Aeneas is one of the greatest chapters in the Aeneid, but that's not the main subject of the Aeneid. That whole love story happens in one chapter. Aeneas meets Dido, they fall in love, they separate, she dies. All happens in one chapter. She does feature again in the Kingdom of the Dead briefly, but she doesn't speak to him. Fair enough. But the whole story, the Aeneid, is not a love story. And well, according to C.S. Lewis, there was no love story in the same way as these guys until these guys, which begs the question that what happened during the medieval period? What happened? Suddenly people start to tell love stories, like pure love stories. The whole story is about love. It's about love and nothing else, to the degree of slight ridiculousness. But it's really interesting to see. I can't remember if I mentioned in my previous video that Odysseus really misses his homeland. He keeps saying, I want to go back to my homeland, I want to go back to Ithaca, I want to see my father, I want to see my son, and oh yes, my wife. Penelope really is not the main reason he wants to go home, and I found that a bit funny. That's basically the point, as in love story is not the main subject of the Odyssey. So no wonder I feel that way. So I feel like I have understood the Odyssey correctly. If you haven't read any of this and you have some time, I genuinely recommend. I thought they would be really dull or so obscure that they'd be just not worth reading, but I was completely wrong. Especially Chretien de Troyes. If you only have a little bit of time, I really recommend you reading them. The Knight with the Lion, also called Ivan, and Percival, the story of the Grail. Those are the two stories that were assigned to us, as in the professor said, if you only have a short period of time to read them, and you can't finish the whole book, just read those two. So those are the two I read, and I recommend them for many reasons. First of all, the stories are really interesting. I had no expectations. I had very low expectations, so they were great. I thoroughly enjoyed them. This is the verse translation. Marie de France wrote in verse. She specifically says, I work till midnight writing these poems and verses. But interestingly, we were told to read a prose translation. I'll put the edition on the screen. but this is the verse translation, and I read a little bit from here just to compare and contrast. I think I prefer the verse translation, so just two options for you to choose from. Either is good. And Chretien de Troyes, this is the edition we were given. So that's the reason, the first reason why I recommend it. They are good stories themselves. Secondly, they really have massive influence, massive impact on English literature all the way from this point on to Chaucer, to Malory, Maud Arthur, and to Fairy Queen, Spenser's Fairy Queen. You see the same thing happen again and again. And if you read it in order, like you read these guys first, and then you get to those later ones, which the course will touch on, as in we will read those things as well later on. And if you are following along, this is fun. This is great fun. You really can see the transformations of these things. For example, the knight with the lion. There is another lion. I wonder if it's the same lion in the Fairy Queen. There's a lion following a lady in the Fairy Queen. I didn't know. I read a little bit of Fairy Queen already just to test it out, and there was a lion. I was thinking this is so random, but it's from here. He wrote it first, and that's just fascinating. You also see some of the things that Chaucer in Troilus and Crusade, same thing happening, that come from here as well. Obviously, I can't say Chaucer borrowed that idea 100%. I don't know, but it sounds so similar. Basically, it's about this lady, well, in Troilus and Crusade is Crusade, kind of arguing with herself if she should fall in love with Troilus. She was like arguing with herself back and forth, should I do this, should I do that? And it happened here first as well. It's just really lovely to see. And I think for that reason, the second reason, you should read this too. It just all links up. You see the development over centuries, over hundreds and thousands of years. This all makes sense. This is just making me very happy. So if you have time, definitely I recommend you to read them. So next time, at some point, I will be talking about Troilus and Crusade. That's our next seminar. I got the books already. It's quite big and I'm going to read it. So watch this space. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.